David Costello from Limerick, Ireland. I was ordained priest from my home diocese over there back in 1995. I spent 8 years there working in school and parish ministry before volunteering to go on mission. I got to know the St. James Society through a Father Gerard O'Mara, who also was from Limerick. And I got to know Gerard through a family connection. He invited me to visit him in Peru back in 2003. So I went home and asked my bishop for permission to go on mission for 5 years. So 18 years later, I'm still with the St. James Society. We were founded here in Boston back in 1958 by Cardinal Cushing, who was the Archbishop at the time. And I suppose basically initially we were founded as the mission wing of the Archdiocese of Boston, but from the very beginning, Cardinal Cushing opened it up so that non-Bostonians like myself would have the chance to spend some time on mission. And the idea being that the priest would spend 5 years on mission in South America and then return home again to his diocese of incarnation. The St. James Society was founded by Cushing at the time as a direct response to a plea to the bishops of North America made by the Pope at the time, Pope Pius XII, when he asked the bishops of North America to send help, to send priests to the southern continent. So that's how the St. James Society came to be founded. Thankfully, 63 years later, we're still in existence, still working on the ground in Peru, both on the coast in the Lima area. We're present in 3 dioceses there, high in the Peruvian Andes in the diocese of Sicuani. And I left Boston to go to Bolivia. So I spent 5 months at language school with the Marian All Fathers in Cochabamba, Bolivia. That was an intensive language learning course, which also involves some cultural orientation. So it was classes 5 days a week, 4 hours a day. Every 2 weeks we changed teachers and so forth. So yeah, that was quite a tough experience in many ways because, you know, having left home and gone to this place called Cochabamba that I'd never heard of. So having lived by myself for 8 years before joining the St. James Society and then going to Bolivia and finding myself living with a family who didn't speak English and I didn't speak Spanish at the time. So that in itself was quite a challenge in the beginning. I remember my first night there, or after my first night, wondering, what the hell have I done to myself?
You couldn't prepare yourself adequately, really. You had to go and see. And the only thing you would really be required to have was just flexibility, like go with the flow.
And one thing that we had to learn, you know, was the culture.
Well, I was in like an inner city situation. There were 3 of us, 3 priests, and we had 3 parishes, but we lived together. And we were guessing we're trying to serve 70,000 people.
Like there were only 2 seasons up there, the dry season and the rainy season.
Going from village to village, little hamlets, and on occasion, because during the rainy season, there's no way you could get into the, you know, some of these little villages, hamlets.
You know, just inches upon inches of rain. And the roads were canals. And somebody bought me hip boots because the water was so deep. And I couldn't drive my truck there, you know, to meet the people. So I went to the local bishop and said, can you help me? So the way he helped me is he gave me a canoe. So I had very little knowledge of guiding a canoe, but it was a way. It was being creative. And we're trying to reach them because the rainy season destroyed community activities. People were isolated. They're in their homes, not working, not having food. So it meant trying to take care of the physical needs of the parishioners and not only the spiritual ones.
Getting to know the customs. And the people were really kind, you know, you'd say some dumb stuff. I'm talking away in my first homily on that weekend, and everybody's just staring at me. They're very polite, the Bolivians, very polite. And I'm using the words, La Gran Papa van a estar con nosotros, and that's the big potato's coming. La Papa is potato. El Papa is the Pope. And all of a sudden I caught it, and people said I turned as red as a beet.
I landed in Lima, and Jim Jeffrey met us at the airport, took us up to Chimbote. I saw the horrible, horrible destruction and the poverty, so I returned to Fargo. 1974, after 5 years in Fargo, I asked permission for the Bishop of Fargo to come out here and be interviewed by Father Denny Dever, and Denny accepted me. So in October, I came to Boston, then down to Lima to study Spanish. George Emerson was the superior, and then George said, "Well, you're going to Chimbote," and there I went.
So I spent my first 2 years in Chimbote. Interesting experience. Chimbote is a city of about 500,000 people, as I said, about 6 hours north of Lima on the coast. At one time back in the 60s, or up until the 60s, it was a very famous fishing port. I gather it was one of the most busy fishing ports in South America. Unfortunately, they overfished. Since then, the stocks have been greatly depleted, so they're only able to fish now 2 or 3 months of the year, which means that there's a lot of unemployment in that city. My introduction to Chimbote was that the electricity went out on the first day, and so there was no electricity for 5 days. The reason the electricity went out was because people used to steal the overhead cables that you have on the street. So there was no electricity for my first 5 days, which meant there was no running water. Then after 2 years, I was asked to take responsibility for a new mission parish in Lima. So I moved down to Lima and began a new parish on the east side of Lima in an area known as Atividade in the Diocese of Chosica. And so there I began the whole process of putting parish infrastructure into place. It's an area with a population somewhere in excess of 100,000 people. It's currently divided into 12 areas or communities where we have Mass, or in some areas we celebrate Mass on the street. So I began there in 2006, and I spent the first 2 years pretty much by myself, getting that project off the ground. And that was another challenge, I suppose, and certainly an interesting experience. For me, it meant going in there and literally finding somewhere to live, first of all, because there was no rectory or parish house or anything. So I spent the first month or so just going around the area trying to find somewhere to rent, which I eventually came across a ground floor space in a house that I rented for the first 2 years. And then I just went out and about. I tell people I was wasting my time for Christ, just walking around, introducing myself as a Catholic priest and letting people know that we were beginning the process of beginning a new parish in that area. And so that's really what I did in the beginning. And then bit by bit, I started celebrating Mass in different communities and slowly but surely began to get that parish infrastructure in place. Huge challenge, of course, at the time.
You talked about the heat down south. Well,
I can't imagine.
when it does last in Ecuador, 10, 11 months of the year, it's brutal day and night for someone like me.
And I was truly inspired by the men themselves, the missionaries, what they were doing, how they were representing in a joyful way the good news of Christ to the people, how they were serving really poor people who really wanted to hear the gospel and drew great strength from it in their impoverished situations that they were living in. It was inspiring to me.
That was the biggest thing. How can I be relevant here? What do I say to these people? Cushing he was way ahead of his time. He specified that St. James was only to work among the poorest of the poor. So we were very lucky. If we had gone to ritzy parishes in Peru, we wouldn't have been there 5 years. But going into poor areas, absolute poverty now, and shocking poverty. And in the middle of that poverty, you meet with gems and take your breath away. But how do you talk to these people who don't know where their next meal is coming from, and they have a big family to look after? And how can you tell them there is a God who loves us? Their God was more a God of fear. They were afraid of God, and they always had to be appeasing. And the church we went into was a priestless church. That was why we went there at all. The Pope, John the 23rd, said he was kept awake at night worrying about the condition of the church in Latin America because of the lack of priests and sisters. So basically we were going to fill that need.
One Saturday evening after Mass, some people came and asked if I could come to say a prayer and give a blessing because there had been a fire in the home. kids were only 3 and 5 years of age. And somehow the 5-year-old was trying to prepare something for the 3-year-old on a gas fire. And somehow the house caught fire, and because there was a chain lock on the door, neighbours weren't able to get in there quick enough. The bomberos, the fire service, had to come from 12 miles away. So the whole thing went up in smoke very quickly. So when I got there, the 2 children had been burned to death. And I'll never forget seeing the 5-year-old clearly had crouched over the 3-year-old, I suppose, to protect the 3-year-old. So I never forget that image of the burnt bodies and the smell of burnt skin, and the 5-year-old clearly trying to protect the 3-year-old, and they both perished in that fire. So it struck me that there was very great need to have a project for children who were otherwise left home. And you know, it wasn't the mother's fault either, because she was out working, doing her best, and I guess she thought that by locking the kids at home, that in some sense it was keeping them safe in her absence. So that was quite a difficult experience. It's probably the most difficult experience that I've had down there, and I've had several experiences, but that in particular is something that I'll certainly never forget. That
I was still in the mountains during the time of the terrorism, when the Shining Path, which was a Leninist, Maoist communism. It was a really, but they were very, very vicious, you know, yeah? The Shining Path. They wanted to start anew, you know, because of the corruption in Peru. But we also felt their presence among us as well. And I remember one time where we were, we could hear the shooting. They killed about 7 or 8 terrorists right there and then. Yeah, you know, yeah. But that, you know, it was living there, you never knew, you know, yeah? You never knew.
That we gave of our abundance. They gave of their nothingness. And I am being blessed to this day.
I got involved, thanks to Joe McCarthy, with the Theology of Liberation. And in 1975, I met Padre Gustavo Gutierrez, but then Jorge Alvarez Calderon. And I said, Jorge, I have an opportunity to get money from my family and my friends in North Dakota. Should I or should I not receive it? And Jorge said, Juanito, the only way the poor are going to get out of their poverty is through education. If you can get money, use that money to help people, the poor, get educated. We started daycare, kindergarten. When I left the parish for Perpetual Socorro, we had 7 libraries. We had 7 soup kitchens. We started this medical post, had a place for the dying. We had 4 centers for delinquents. You know, gringos would say, oh, this is paternalism, you know, existentialismo. And I said, no, it's not. I said, if you have a child who didn't have supper the night before and didn't have breakfast, and he's in a classroom or she's in a classroom at 10 o'clock, he can't study. So what do you have? You have a soup kitchen. That enables that child to study, and through education may get out of poverty.
One key project when I was there as pastor was simply, there was a beggar at the church door in the main town every day. Could have been almost 24 hours a day, and his wife was crippled. He was blind, she was crippled. And they lived in very simple circumstances. And alas, their home burned down. And the question is, could we do something for them? Now, the other 2 priests, Tom Lawn from New Zealand, and Terence McSweeney from Liverpool, England, and myself, we went to every home within the parish of the town, making collection, contribution to build something for them. That was challenging, but it was a wonderful experience, because all the people knew who Don Caicedo was. and they were all happy to give of their empty pockets something to be of assistance. I've never forgotten that.
One of the ways that affected me when I came back, still does in a way, but especially when I first came back, a very careful use of water. And I felt very uncomfortable in our large supermarkets because you see so much food. We don't even think of it. We don't even think of it, you know.
I recall an elderly lady would come to church every Sunday in the town of Triunfo, and she'd always bring a basket of eggs. And she'd say, unos huevositos por mi padrecitos. A few eggs for my lovely fathers. It was all she had. And she offered that week after week after week. And it was not unusual. Let's say when I got back from my area, I could have a bunch of bananas, a melon, a pineapple, fruits of the earth. And it reminds me of the time of the offertory and in the Mass, in reference to the bread and the wine, fruits of the earth, the work of human hands.
So I spent 6 years at the parish in Lima, getting that off the ground, and I had different priests with me along the way. And then while I was down there, I was elected to be the regional superior, which meant that I had overall responsibility for all of our parish and mission sites in Peru. And so, responsible for the business management, making sure that funding coming into Peru was being used correctly. I suppose a change that has come about in the last 10 years is that we're no longer coming primarily from the likes of Ireland, England, Scotland, North America. Now we have members from the Philippines and Ghana, and we've taken on a few Peruvian priests in the last few years. And so our membership makeup is now coming from other places, as it were. So that's a bit of a change, and it's a challenge for us as well. It's a challenge when you have different cultures coming together, maybe a priest from Boston living with a priest from Ghana and a priest from the Philippines. They're three totally different cultures living under the one roof, and that in itself, of course, poses challenges. My role is very different to what it would have been in Peru. As I mentioned, I'm responsible for recruiting. I do believe that the St. James Society has a future, albeit our future will be very different to what we were in the past. But I'd just like to say that if there are any priests out there who are interested in joining the St. James Society, we have a lot to offer. I think it's a great experience for enhancing your ministry. The whole challenge of going to South America, working in a new culture, learning a new language, and just getting that experience of living and working on the ground with people in South America. And of course, it gives you the opportunity to come back here to North America in particular, where there is huge need for Hispanic ministry, for Spanish-speaking priests. And while some might imagine that it's just okay to go and learn to speak Spanish so you can celebrate Mass in Spanish, there's much more involved in ministering to the Hispanic population. It's not just about celebrating Mass in Spanish. It's more about understanding the culture of the people you're ministering to, so you can, understand where they are coming from and converse with them, as opposed to just simply celebrating the Mass and leaving it at that. So I think there's a huge opportunity that the St. James Society can offer priests here, particularly from North America, to go spend 5 years on mission and then come back with that experience and minister here in North America. We'd certainly be happy to have you.
No podemos caminar con hambre bajo el sol. Danos siempre el mismo pan, tu cuerpo